Welcome to the Matt and Darcy Show. Please welcome your hosts, Matt Chung and Darcy Davis.
Tonight, we will be looking at the effects of the New Deal on the current economic situation right here in the United States.
Yes, we will cover unemployment figures and relief efforts, New Deal legislation, and the banking crisis. Even later, we will be interviewing John Maynard Keynes.
During the Progressive Era, the role of the government was greatly expanded by presidents such as Theodore Roosevelt. Right now, during our recent Great Depression, our wonderful President, Franklin Roosevelt, expanded the role of the federal government even more. How did he do this? We will be looking at the several legislative acts that he passed today.
You are so right, Matt.
Moving on, we're going to cut to Natalie Anderson at a Farm Security Administration unemployment camp. Spokesmen from different relief programs are there advertising different employment options.
Yes, I'm here with Mr. Bacher, who is looking to get a job.
Oh, you just call me Seal.
So tell me a little bit about the relief spokesman you heard from today.
Those poor people from Hoover's President's Organization of Unemployment Relief think they're so much better than us with their non-political stance and their aiding the welfare agencies.
Oh, well, what about the actual welfare agencies? Tell me a little bit about them.
Oh, why didn't you say so? All those people from FERA, the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, they set up under Roosevelt and was the first relief operation under the New Deal's Emergency Relief Federation.
So what did they do?
Oh, they do something about giving loans to operate relief programs like the stupid poor people.
Poor as in the President's Organization of Unemployment Relief.
Yep, like they gave money to TERRA, the Temporary Emergency Relief Organization in New York.
So what can FERA do for you, Mr. Bacher?
They could create new unskilled jobs in local and state governments. I'm looking to get one of them, or maybe I'll just go back to school.
Well, FERA does have an adult education program that you might benefit from.
Yep, and it's great because they also like to buy farms surplus and redistribute it back to the poor.
The actual poor people, not the administration. In 1935, FERA was replaced by the WPA, the Works Progress Administration. Thank you for your time, Mr. Bacher. Back to you, Matt.
Thanks for that, Natalie. Now
What's the WPA, Matt? Could you explain it to me?
Sure. I can't believe you haven't heard of it. It's only the largest New Deal agency that employed millions of unskilled workers with public wealth projects such as building schools and bridges. Most communities have at least one structure built by them, partially financed by state and local governments.
Like Occoloni's High School?
Yes, very good, Darcy.
Thanks, Matt.
They also redistribute food, clothing, and housing, providing 10 to 30% of funds for the projects they facilitate. At their peak in 1938, they employed 3 million men.
And just to clarify, the camp that they were at, called the Farm Security Administration, or FSA, does rural rehabilitation, right?
That's correct. The FSA bought land from poor farmers and resettled them into farm groups, though sadly this effort failed because farmers wanted individual control of their land. And now for a quick commercial break.
Are you unemployed? Are you unmarried? Are you a man? Come down to your local Civilian Conservation Corps office. We'll match you with a perfect unskilled manual labor job. It'll be a match made in heaven. It'll most likely involve the development of natural resources, like iron. Ask your friends, ask your neighbors. We're the best. We've already planted 3 billion trees. Come and join us. It's a match made in heaven.
You know what else would be a match made in heaven?
Please note that we are popular, we are not a permanent agency. We depend on emergency and temporary congressional legislation, and we shut down in 1942 due to the war industry and draft organization.
Welcome back from the break. Tonight we'll be continuing our coverage of the national banking crisis that has crippled our economy.
Thank you, Matt. Now, recapping what we've covered in the past few weeks, our banking crisis was caused by countless risky loans American banks made during World War I in the 1920s. So when our real estate and stock market bubbles burst in 1929 and agricultural prices collapsed, our loans went bad.
Well, times were tough, Darcy, and what's worse was that some banks couldn't cover their customers' deposits. Angry depositors have been making bank runs where crowds gather outside broke banks demanding their money.
Of course, pulling their savings just made things worse for the banks, who then couldn't cover anyone's deposits. Investing savings in gold had also become popular, which put a strain on the nation's gold reserves.
By 1932, our banks had pretty much shut down, and yet Roosevelt would not support our lame duck President Hoover in taking action because he would not be in full control.
But that seems dramatic of Roosevelt, Matt.
But Roosevelt's lack of cooperation before his inauguration was justified. His inaugural address promised us decisive action in a time of insecurity. Only a day after, he put his promises into effect and shut down our nation's banks for 4 days and held an emergency session with Congress.
Though the content of the emergency Congress meeting was kept secret at first, we managed to get you exclusive coverage of what really went on in the White House. According to our sources, Roosevelt wasted no time introducing the Emergency Banking Relief Bill, which gave federal authority to reopen solvent banks and reorganize the rest, while authorizing federal money for shoring up private banks.
But Darcy, that didn't address the problem of privately owned banks at all.
You're right, Matt. Some of you might remember how in his inaugural speech, Roosevelt attacked unscrupulous money changers. Now, some of us took that to mean that he would take the banks from private hands, but this simply didn't happen.
Then it appears that Roosevelt's policy simply upheld the status quo, which makes it fundamentally conservative.
It does look that way, but nevertheless, his bill was passed unanimously by the House, 73-7 in the Senate, and was signed into law all in the same day.
Now the question is just whether these measures will be effective.
Yes, unless Americans were confident enough to deposit their money in the newly regulated banks, these relief efforts would have failed.
That's why, with the president's first fireside chat, he aimed to build support for his measures by speaking directly to the American people. One of our reporters covered the action as it happened. Let's roll the clip.
Well, Matt, this is just incredible. Just after the end of Roosevelt's rallying speech, people have begun to line up at banks to deposit money. How did the president win your support for his measures, sir?
So far, I like how bold Roosevelt's actions have been, but at the same time, not too radical.
Well, there you have it. President Roosevelt had gained support already. Only time would tell whether his measures would be truly effective.
So was President Roosevelt correct? Were his reforms the best way to pull the country out of the recession? To answer these questions, here we have John Maynard Keynes with his thoughts on the economic situation.
Thanks for having me on the show.
No problem, John. So, to get some basic questions out of the way, just in case some kids have to take a test on you, when and where were you born, and what do you do?
I was born in England in 1883 and I'm an economist. Many economists have actually based their ideas off of my own. I've also written many books, the most influential being The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, published in 1936.
Alright, Mr. Keynes. When there is an economic recession, what do you think is the best way to fix it?
Well, first you have to understand what causes the recession. It's a boom and bust cycle. During a bust cycle, people stop spending, so employers cut wages in order to keep profits up. But now, people have less money, so they spend even less than before. And now there's surplus. And since there's no money in circulation now, it goes into an ever downward spiral.
So how do you get out of this downward spiral?
Well, the federal government takes out loans and then supplies the public with money through projects such as public works. It will create a demand, and then wages will go up and people start spending again. However, the catch is that afterwards the government has to pay back their loans.
So that means in America, the role of the federal government has to expand.
Yes, the progressive era had already expanded the government's role greatly. What FDR did was just the next step in Wilson, Taft, and Teddy Roosevelt reforms.
So what about unemployment? How does that fit in?
Well, the government should regulate wages, because if wages are held low, people won't spend as much. And as I said before, less spending equals less demand, which means companies cut wages even more and the economy goes into a recession.
So America was right in controlling economics to reboost the economy.
Yes, a strong federal government did help increase demand and therefore output.
Alright, thank you for your time, Mr. Keynes, and now we're going to cut to a quick commercial break.
This program has been brought to you by the Public Works Administration, or PWA, led by Secretary of the Interior Harold L. Ikes after their formation under the National Industrial Recovery Act in June 1933. Since then, they have given over $6 billion to private construction companies in order to provide employment and stabilize purchasing power, encouraging economic recovery. Using their priming the pump philosophy, the PWA successfully executes the multiplier effect. This is where, for every person directly affected by the PWA, at least 2 more are affected also. This is due to their projects such as building nearly 11,500 roads and building public housing for poor people in the major cities.
Welcome back to the Matt and Darcy Show. We will now cut to our weekly segment, The Act Pact with Scott Fredrickson, where acts will be discussed and how they affect you, the American people. It's you, Scott.
Thanks, Darcy. So how's Matt doing?
He's good.
I'm still here.
Oh, hi Matt. Well, anyway, today we'll be discussing the Emergency Relief Appropriation Act, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and the Social Security Act.
Let's start with the Emergency Relief Appropriation Act. What did that do?
Well, under the Emergency Relief Appropriation Act, the Resettlement Act, or RA, was established in April 1935 by Roosevelt's Executive Order 7027 and was led by Rexford G. Tugwell, who was an economics professor at Columbia. Congress was not very happy with the Resettlement Administration and their goal to relocate 650,000 people, though despite Congress' disapproval, they still managed to relocate a few thousand, and 45 relief camps were established in California to help migrant workers, such as those fleeing. Well, under the Emergency Relief Appropriation Act, the Resettlement Administration, or RA, was established in April 1935 by Roosevelt's Executive Order 7027 and was led by Rexford G. Tugwell, an economics professor at Columbia. Congress is not happy with the Resettlement Administration and the goal to relocate 650,000 people. Despite Congress's disapproval, they did manage to relocate a few thousand. They also established 45 relief camps in California to help migrant workers fleeing the conditions of the Dust Bowl. So far, 75,000 people have taken advantage of these camps. They have also worked with over 200 communities, such as Greendale, Wisconsin. There is also rumor that the Resettlement Administration will be folded into the Farm Security Administration in September 1937.
Are there any successful acts?
As a matter of fact, there are some more successful ones. The AAA, for example, or the Agricultural Adjustment Act, passed on May 12, 1933. It was the first modern U.S. farm bill. In order to revive the economy, the government has been paying subsidies to farmers and ranchers in order to either not plant part of their fields and leave them fallow, or kill off excess livestock. This means that there's going to be no more surplus, and then the value and price of these crops and livestock will go up. But believe me, this is not just destroying perfectly good food for no reason. This is helping to revive the economy. So people, please do not panic. The Title III of AAA is the Thomas Amendment, also known as the third horse of New Deal reform. It was passed by Senator Elmer Thomas of Oklahoma, combining populist easy money ideas with new economic theories for the purpose of stabilizing the honest dollar. It allows the president to cut the amount of gold backing every U.S. banknote by as much as 50% in order to print more money and flood the market with currency.
So basically the dollar is being strengthened.
That's correct. The last act I'll talk about today is the Social Security Act of 1935. It was passed in Roosevelt's first term by the President's Committee of Economic Security and placed under Francis Perkin. Their goal was to limit old age, poverty, unemployment burdens by paying out money over time in a lump sum at death. They also gave money to states to help people in stress, such as the blind or pregnant, which I do believe everyone will enjoy.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
And not to butt in, but the Social Security Act was confirmed by such court cases as Stewart Machine Company v. Davis, as well as Helvering v. Davis. And that concludes our Act Pact segment.
We are coming to you with special coverage of the National Industrial Recovery Act, or NIRA, which aims to end the destructive competition that is worsening industry's economic hardships. This act authorizes competing businesses to cooperate and create codes to limit their production, establish industry-wide prices for their goods, and set worker wages. The President's justification for these new rules are that without competition to drive down prices and wages, industry will be stabilized, spending will increase, and factories will be able to rehire workers. Section 7A protected collective bargaining right of unions. Although participation in this program is voluntary, businesses who do are allowed to display the Blue Eagle, the National Recovery Administration symbol. The government will encourage boycotts of businesses without the Blue Eagle. The National Recovery Administration, or NRA, has been created to handle businesses' participation in this act. Experts have begun to speculate already, though. Won't big businesses easily dominate the NRA? The NRA staff probably won't have the training or experience to stand up to the representatives of major corporations. What will happen? Back to you, Matt and Darcy.
Thanks, Natalie.
Now here is some footage of Press Secretary Stephen Early speaking on the second 100 days and the New Deal.
Thank you all for assembling here today. I believe over the past 3 years, our administration has made great achievements in a collection of legislative acts that President Roosevelt likes to call the Second New Deal.
What would you say is the biggest success of the Second New Deal, Press Secretary Stephen Early?
I believe the most significant law passed was the Emergency Relief Appropriation Act, or as the President likes to call it, the Big Bill. The act supplied the government with $4 billion in new deficit spending, geared towards large-scale public works programs for the unemployed, like the Works Progress Administration, or the WPA, our biggest public works program.
I hear that this big bill has been the financial source for several other reform programs in addition to the WPA. Could you name a few?
That is correct. There is the Resettlement Administration, which helps find homes for poor families and organizes rural homestead communities and towns for low-income workers. We take steps to supply even the most desolate rural zones with electricity through our Rural Electrification Administration. The National Youth Association also helps sponsor work relief activities for young adults and part-time work for students. Another major provision of the Big Bill was the Social Security Act.
What effect has the Second New Deal had on labor and unions?
In 1935, Congress passed the National Labor Relations Act, also called the Wagner Act, which was intended to protect the rights of employees and employers, encourage collective bargaining, and reduce certain private sector labor and management practices that can damage the welfare of workers, businesses, and the economy.
I realize that in this tough economy, farmers are attempting to increase their product inventory and sales in the process. How is the Roosevelt administration handling this problem?
Well, in 1936, we enacted the Soil Conservation and Domestic Allotment Act. The government pays farmers to reduce production and save soil and prevent erosion of the land. We hope that this will aid in cutting down crops and livestock surplus.
And how have the Native Americans responded to your legislative efforts?
Well, the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934 has several provisions for the Native people. We have attempted to conserve and develop their lands and resources granted to them to form businesses and other organizations, established a credit system for them, extended certain rights of home rule, and provided practical vocalization training as well.
Could you describe your improvements in the housing crisis?
The Housing Act was passed in 1937, or informally titled the Wagner-Steagall Act. Our government pays for subsidies to local public housing agencies to enhance living conditions for impoverished and low-income families. This act has also led to the establishment of the United States Housing Authority. The USHA lends money to states or local communities for low-cost construction of housing units.
Recently, the Roosevelt administration passed two new laws, the Second Agricultural Adjustment Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act. Could you provide some more insight as to what the purposes of these acts are?
The Second Agricultural Adjustment Act is mainly a revision of the original Agricultural Adjustment Act that was passed in 1933. Due to the success of the 1935 Soil Conservation and Domestic Allotment Act, we have decided that instead of imposing tax on the processor to finance operations, the government will take responsibility for providing the funds. The Fair Labor Standards Act sets the minimum federal wage at 40 cents per hour and promises time and a half pay for overtime in select jobs, and outlaws most employment of minors in what we determine to be oppressive child labor.
One last question. How do you generate the funds to enforce all of these acts?
I should have mentioned before, the Revenue Act, passed in 1935, raises taxes on higher income levels, setting a more graduated system. This helps distribute wealth evenly during our depression and also provides us with much needed finances for our legislation.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Early.
2, 3, go.
Wow, he had really great hair. But of course, yours is the best, Matt.
And now we're going to Natalie, who's going to give us a live interview from a strike.
So I'm here at the West Coast Waterfront Strike in San Francisco. Let's go see how it's doing so far. I'm with the Matt and Darcy show. Could you tell us how the strike is coming along?
It has been a great accomplishment for our working people. Our strike has lasted for 83 days due to the unfair conditions imposed on our sailors.
Have you had any support except from sailors?
Of course, due to ours and others' plights, it did start a 4-day San Francisco general strike. Fight the power!
So the general public is outraged at the conditions of the nation too. Does this have anything, in your opinion, to do with Father Charles Kalin and his anti-Semitic and anti-New Deal seminars before they were shut down by FDR?
The strike and others across the country were not caused by him, but he sure has led to greater unrest and has brought out more people to join the strikes. Though sadly, he does support ideas of Hitler and Mussolini.
Thank you for your time. Sir, excuse me, sir. What is your take on the American Liberty League established by the Democrats?
Well, in general, I do not like them because of the anti-New Deal stance, though I do believe in their stance for teaching respect for rights and property along with protecting individual freedom.
So the workers don't particularly stand by the American Liberty League, even though it was made in 1934 in response to strikes.
All we want is better working conditions and better wages.
Well, in that case, what is your opinion on the Hawley-Smoot tariff by Senator Reed Smart and Representative Willis C. Hawley, passed in 1930, imposing the second highest tariff in U.S. history?
I love it. Duties on over 20,000 foreign goods were raised up to 40% and caused local manufacturers and businessmen to be able to sell their products without competition, helping to revive the economy.
One last question. Has the National Labor Relations Act, also called the NLRA, or the Wagner Act, passed in 1935, has it helped you in mediating the dispute between workers and employers?
I don't know if they are helping our protest here, but I have heard that they help limit the employers' reactions to labor unions and allow collective bargaining. Though it does not cover people already protected by the Railroad Labor Act, luckily it outlaws wildcat strikes, which are the sudden strikes, and it also demands that people request permission from the National Labor Relations Board to leave their union in the case that the unions are not effectively representing the workers. This helps to keep people on the side of legitimate demonstrations such as our own.
Thank you for your time.
Tonight at 10, the showdown of the century. On one side, we have the reigning champion of the craftspeople, the American Federation of Labor, or the AFL. Founded in 1886 by the Knights of Labor, they've held the title of largest union in the world. They stand by such things as the 1903 Open Shop movement, where they try to drive out unions from the construction, mining, and longshore industries. They also set regulations on immigration. They have sub-unions such as the National Civic Federation, which have worked for collective bargaining and responsible unionism.
In the other corner, the upcoming rival since 1932, since their creation by John L. Lewis. It's a Congress of Industrial Organization, or CIO. Made to combat the American Federation of Labor, they support FDR with the New Deal and they let in blacks. They plan forcing the AFL to organize along union lines, but are failing. Can they take on the reigning champion? Even with sub-unions such as the United Automobile Workers, only one way to find out.
It's like this, y'all. This is 10% luck, 20% skill, 15% concentrated power of will, 5% pleasure, 50% pain, and 100% reason to remember the name.
And that concludes our special on 1930s economics.
I hope you've enjoyed watching. I know I certainly have enjoyed being here with Matt.
We hope you have a good weekend here from the Matt and Darcy Show, and we'll see you next time.
That's a wrap!
Good show.